picking and choosing in the space of possible experience, would you grant that there are experiences you haven't had and you don't know what you're missing?
Yes, in terms of what I would, if experiencing those, subjectively enjoy, sure.
Or there are experiences that are available to people and other conscious minds, but they're not available to you given how you are, right? So you might not have the talent required to get there, or the genes required to get you there. Or
Absolutely, no
right.
problem with that.
Okay, so the landscape of possible experience extends what you currently know or even can know, right? And that's true of every person like you. And then now we're saying boo at each other in that context.
And this landscape we're talking about is a landscape of experiences, either possible or actual, which so that now this new pleasure opens up to me and I can experience it. What would I do? I'd look at that pill and I'd go, yeah, sounds great, awesome. And I'd take the pill just because I would prefer to have that preference. It's a second order preference, right? But there's still no space here into which has entered a concept of like moral prescription, of goodness, of ought. I'm still just in this world where there are experiences I prefer, and I use my scientific analysis of the world to achieve those. And when something comes along that allows me to really radically improve that feeling of subjective preference, hell yeah, use all the science you can get to give me those pills.
Right.
But still no moral judgments here, right?
Well, there are potentially, but they might not be necessary. I mean, as long as you're going to concede that you might not know what you're missing, if you might not know how good life could be if you only made certain changes to yourself or to your thinking.
Going to get me what I want and which things aren't. So I start acting in accordance. Yeah. Then we all get together, and because it's going to be good for me if I work with this person, we work together and we start developing maybe this pill, and then somebody comes over on a boat and says, hey, there's this great thing that you don't even know that you're missing, give it a go. And I'm so open-minded that I'm like, yeah, sounds awesome. And the pleasures are just increasing and increasing all the time. And again, like the end, end scene, story's over. That's the picture for me.
Right.
Because if it is the case that there are in fact moral values in the world, like there is this thing called objective moral truth. The picture I've just painted, as far as I can see, doesn't contain it. So
I
what's
think it does.
wrong about that picture? Where's it gone wrong?
No, the more we fill in the blank spots in that picture, the more I think we get everything we could conceivably want by any talk about right and wrong, good and evil. So I mean, just give yourself a desert island and maybe add another person. So you're Adam and Eve, right? And you're building the world.
Change and all that, but I'm broadly attracted to this view that when we make ethical statements or pronouncements, we're essentially just expressing emotions at each other. And so when I say that murder is wrong, I'm sort of expressing some kind of distaste, or I'm expressing something akin to saying, don't do that, which is just like a command. It doesn't have any truth value. It's not even subjectively true or false. It's just like a command or an expression. And so if that's the case, then this sort of ethical talk is completely different to the picture that you're painting. And so
No, not really. I can translate some of that into the picture I'm painting, because again, it sounds like to say that it's just a statement about the way we feel or might feel.
Well, it's not. To be clear, it's not a statement about how we feel. It is the expression of the feeling. So the mistake that's often made with the motivism is when I say murder is wrong, I'm not saying something like I don't like murder or I feel bad towards murder. Because that can be true and false. As we were discussing earlier, it can be true that I don't like murder. It's the expression of the dislike to the murder. So A.F. famously has it as just going, boo, murder. That's not something that has any kind of truth value. And
boo doesn't, but you're granting that it is possible to not like murder, and that could be an objective state of a subjective system.
Yeah, that's no problem at all.
Yeah,
sure.
Okay.
And so I find myself in a world where I put my hand on a hot stove, and when I do, I go, I don't like that. And it's objectively true that I don't like that. Cool. And so I look around the world, and there are certain experiences that are going to make me suffer and some that are not. And so I pick the ones that don't make me suffer because I prefer them. And that's it, man. That's the story.
Okay, let's build from there. So that's you as the emotivist, picking and choosing in the space of possible experience. Would you grant that there are experiences you haven't had and you don't know what you're missing?
Yes, in terms of what I would, if experiencing those, subjectively enjoy. Sure.
Right. So, and it might be there are circumstances where, or there are experiences that are available to people and other conscious minds, but they're not available to you given how you are. Right. So you might not have the talent required to get there, or the genes required to get you there. Or
Absolutely. Yeah. No problem with that.
Okay. So the landscape of possible experience extends what you currently know or even can know.
Mhm.
Right. And that's true of every person
Absolutely,
like you. And
yeah,
now we're saying boo at each other in that context.
And this landscape we're talking about is a landscape of experiences, either possible or actual, which if I were to experience them, I would go, yay. I'd go,
Right.
yeah, sure,
Right.
great.
But the yay, the thumbs up and thumbs down can be increasingly strident, right? I mean, like there are experiences that are so good
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
you'll have the experience of everything that's happened up to me, up to this moment in my life. It was comparatively worthless compared to this experience that I'm now having,
Sure.
right? And obviously the opposite is the case. So what do you make of the fact that these experiences exist, right? And they're radically different, and that there are right and wrong answers with respect to how to get from one to the other. It's not, you don't randomly get just hurled toward one or the other.
Sure.
There are, at every level that we can understand ourselves scientifically, from the genome on up, so genetics and neuroscience and psychology and sociology, if that were actually a science, economic systems, everything, every contribution to a possible change in the character of our experience can be more or less well understood.
Absolutely.
Rationally.
Yeah, no problem with that either.
Okay. So all those converging lines of fact-based discussion can be brought to bear on this navigation problem.
Yeah.
Right.
So because I've got this subjective preference to reach this peak,
Mm-hmm.
I can use all of the scientific resources available to me to go and reach.
Alex O'Connor defends emotivism. When we say murder is wrong, we're not stating truth, but expressing emotion, like booing at a match. That view, taken from A.J. Ayer and C.L. Stevenson, reduces ethics to noise. But Sam Harris dismantles it. Morality, he argues, is rooted in facts about human well-being, not in preferences disguised as principles. The evidence is overwhelming. The World Happiness Report shows that societies with lower corruption, stronger institutions, and higher social trust consistently report greater life satisfaction. Neuroscience proves that poverty and violence alter brain function, impairing learning and shortening lives. Economic studies demonstrate that inequality and instability directly erode health and social cohesion. These are not opinions, they are measurable realities. History reinforces Harris's case. The documented decline of homicide, slavery, and torture, alongside rising literacy and falling child mortality, tracks with the growth of secular governance, science, and human rights. Flourishing increased not because people shouted louder boos and yays, but because real conditions changed. Harris's point is stark. Morality is not emotion. It is a domain of truth, grounded in the facts of what helps or harms conscious beings.
Other element to this, which is you've got your preference weights such as they are now. You got the factory settings, but you didn't pick your parents, you didn't pick your genes, you didn't pick the factory, you didn't pick your culture and the world into which you were born, and you've been tuned up by forces beyond your control.
Yep.
Now we have something like a completed science of the mind, and you can actually change your preferences.
Okay.
Right. And there's this additional question of whether you should do that, whether that would be a good thing to do, but good as measured by what?
Well, in my universe, we don't have terms like good yet. That hasn't entered into the
so
picture
you'll just say boo differently if we change those weights, right?
So let's say like somebody offers me the opportunity to take a pill, and let's say that in this world I don't really like music that much,
right?
So I don't really care for it, whatever. And I can take a pill that's suddenly going to turn me into this great music lover, where I'm going to experience this brand new joy. And although right now my preference isn't to enjoy music, so it doesn't seem to matter to me, I can change my preferences so that now this new pleasure opens up to me and I can experience it. What would I do? I'd look at that pill and I'd go, yeah, sounds great, awesome. And I'd take the pill just because I would prefer to have that preference. It's a second order preference, right? But there's still no space here into which has entered a concept of like moral prescription, of goodness, of ought. I'm still just in this world where there are experiences I prefer, and I use my scientific analysis of the world to achieve those. And when something comes along that allows me to really radically improve that feeling of subjective preference, hell yeah, use all the science you can get to give me those pills.
Right.
But still no moral judgments here, right?
Well, there are potentially, but they might not be necessary. I mean, like, as long as you're going to concede that you might not know what you're missing, if you might not know how good life could be if you only made certain changes to yourself or to your thinking or to your culture, right? So we have a bunch of people like you who just don't want to talk about shoulds and oughts, right? And they never do. They just occasionally they say boo, but they don't think anything really hangs on it. And then if it could be an empirical fact about you and your or people like you, that you're cognitively and emotionally and culturally and civilizationally closed to certain outcomes, which are available the moment you begin to play a little bit differently.
I'm not sure why those would be correlated, because like this idea that there are experiences that are available to me that I don't even know what I'm missing.
Alex O'Connor argues that morality reduces to preference. Genetics, culture, and circumstance shape desires, and individuals can alter those desires with science. A pill that turns indifference to music into joy demonstrates that preferences can shift. But for O'Connor, the shift carries no moral weight. It is simply one preference replacing another. Sam Harris insists that morality is grounded in facts. Global health data shows the impact of concrete interventions. Access to clean water, sanitation, and vaccines has added over 20 years to global life expectancy in the last century. The World Bank records that extreme poverty dropped from 42% of the global population in 1981 to less than 10% today, with billions gaining access to education, housing, and opportunity. Neuroscience establishes that chronic stress from poverty and violence damages the brain, reducing memory and decision-making. Stable, educated environments strengthen cognitive development and improve well-being. History demonstrates the same pattern. The abolition of slavery ended a system that extracted labor through suffering and systematically erased human potential. Universal education expanded literacy and created societies capable of producing innovation at scale. Child mortality fell by over 60% since 1990, with millions of lives preserved through medicine and public health. These outcomes reshaped human existence and are documented in rising life satisfaction, creativity, and prosperity. The Enlightenment solidified this trajectory. Thinkers such as Hume, Spinoza, Voltaire, and Paine rejected divine command and rooted morality in reason, experience, and human welfare. Their work laid the foundation for modern rights, democracy, and secular institutions. These ideas produced measurable results: legal equality, scientific progress, and protections for individual autonomy. Institutions that resisted this shift preserved hierarchy and stagnation. Those that embraced it advanced the conditions of life on every front. Moral talk cannot be dismissed as noise when the conditions that allow humans to thrive are recorded with such precision. Civilizations that entrenched hierarchy limited the possibilities of their people. Scientific and social reforms altered those conditions, producing longer lives, healthier bodies, and minds capable of new achievements. These are not abstractions. They are empirical realities that define what it means for human beings to flourish. Harris places morality within this framework of truth. Questions of right and wrong are answered in the same way as questions of health or engineering, through evidence of what sustains or destroys human lives. The expansion of rights, the reduction of violence, and the preservation of life are not matters of opinion. They are achievements visible in data, history, and lived experience. Morality exists in the facts of human flourishing. To ignore this is to ignore the story of progress written into the last 2 centuries of human history.
morality? Because if you said to me,
I'm still just on the so again, I'm bracketing morality, the judgmental valence of that term for the purpose of this part of the conversation. I'm just saying that this descriptively we're in kind of in the descriptive still value laden landscape of this feels much better than this over here, which I never want to taste or touch again, right?
Crucially, just for clarity, I would say, in my view here, this is subjective value. These are subjectively valued.
These are objective facts about conscious systems.
Objective facts about how to best achieve what one subjectively values.
Yeah, but that turn doesn't do anything deflationary for me. It's just there are certain things that only exist as appearances in consciousness, right? That is their ontological status, right? There's no even if we could later correlate them with other states of the physics of things, it's just you can't conceptually reduce them. You can't. There's no the there is as conscious experiences, right? And I would say consciousness itself is one of those things. It's just that the only evidence for consciousness in this universe is as consciousness, right? It's like there's no evidence in a brain that consciousness is a thing, right?
Okay. So is there something from this picture that we've been painting so far, where I've started in a world, I don't know why I'm imagining like I'm on some desert island, like we're starting from scratch, like the opening Minecraft game or something. I'm just here in this world, and there are things I prefer and things that I don't, and I start to learn scientifically through observation which things are going to get me what I want and which things aren't. So I start acting in accordance. Then we all get together, and because it's going to be good for me if I work with this person, we work together and we start developing maybe this pill, and then somebody comes over on a boat and says, hey, there's this great thing that you don't even know that you're missing, give it a go. And I'm so open-minded that I'm like, yeah, sounds awesome. And the pleasures are just increasing and increasing all the time. And again, like the end, end scene, story's over. That's the picture for me.
Right.
Because if it is the case that there are in fact moral values in the world, like there is this thing called objective moral truth. The picture I've just painted, as far as I can see, doesn't contain it. So
I
what's
think it
wrong
does.
about that picture? Where's it gone wrong?
No, the more we fill in the blank spots in that picture, the more I think we get everything we could conceivably want by any talk about right and wrong, good and evil. So I mean, just give yourself a desert island and maybe add another person. So you're Adam and Eve, right? And you're building the world anew, and then the question is again, there's just two of you. And you have a navigation problem even there, right? And you would even have a navigation problem alone, but let's make it a little more complex. So there's two of you, and now the question is, how can you live so as to maximize everything that would be rewarding, good, yum? I want more of that.
Yeah, well, that is what they would in fact be doing, but there would be no.
Okay, but again, the crucial thing to admit is that there are right and wrong answers. That there are very real and very different possibilities in the space of all possible experience that can be actualized. There's some they couldn't possibly get to in a normal human lifespan because two people is just not enough to get you those things, right? But there's a range of right and more wrong answers open to them as to how to maximize what I'm calling their well-being, right? And the first answer is, they could both pick up large rocks and start smashing each other in the face, right? Now that would be a bad answer to this. It's a possible answer. It will give them some immediate feedback as to what life is like when you do that.
Be the wrong way to get their well-being.
Wrong way, and it just closes the door to other kinds of collaboration that we know are going to be objectively better if better means navigating away from the worst possible misery for everyone and towards something, or in your emotivist terms, fewer booze and more yums, the character of experience will change, and will change by virtue of whatever laws of nature underwrite the character of conscious experience, right? And
That's right.
Again, we can understand those laws at every level that we attempt to understand anything, from genetics on up.
Alex O'Connor describes morality as preference. People inherit their genes, their upbringing, and the culture that shapes them. Desires are formed by circumstance, and science can even alter those desires. A pill that turns indifference to music into joy only adds another layer of preference. In this picture, morality never enters the frame. Sam Harris answers with evidence. Human well-being is measurable. Global life expectancy rose from 31 years in 1900 to more than 73 today, driven by sanitation, vaccines, and nutrition. The World Bank shows extreme poverty fell from 42% of the world's population in 1981 to under 10%, moving billions into safer, healthier conditions. UNICEF reports that child mortality declined by almost 60% since 1990, saving more than 100 million young lives. Neuroscience demonstrates that poverty and violence alter brain function, while education and stability support healthier development. These outcomes are recorded in data, not dependent on anyone's personal taste. History carries the same record. The abolition of slavery freed millions from forced labor. Universal education expanded literacy, producing new knowledge and civic participation. Public health measures like clean water systems and vaccination campaigns ended epidemics that once killed millions. Enlightenment thinkers like Hume, Spinoza, and Paine placed human welfare at the center of political life, helping build institutions that still shape democratic society. When morality is dismissed as preference, these achievements lose their grounding, and atrocities like slavery or authoritarian rule can be excused as cultural taste. Harris points to this landscape as the substance of morality. Questions of right and wrong find their answers in the realities of human flourishing, not in abstractions. The record of progress is visible in falling mortality, rising literacy, and expanding opportunities. The evidence already speaks. Morality exists in the facts of human well-being, and the task is recognizing it. What do you think? Is religion essential for moral values, or can ethics and compassion stand on their own? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this sparked new ideas, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep the discussion alive.
You made a very interesting analysis of how people use or misuse God, but you made no argument about God himself. And by attacking the quote, wicked, unquote, use of God does not at all address the existence of God.
Now, I didn't say that God was misused. I hope I wasn't so poorly understood by everybody. I said that the idea of God is a dictatorial one to begin with, the belief in a supreme, eternal, invigilating creator who knows what you think and what you do and cares about it and will reward or punish you and watches you while you sleep is, I think, a horrific belief, a man-made one. Grief, so it hadn't really sunk in on me that as you were being ordained, when I was 9, I was just getting out of there completely. It was 9 when I thought I saw through it, when my biology teacher told me that God was so good as to have made vegetation green because it was the color most restful to our eyes. And I thought, Mrs. Watts, this is nonsense. I knew nothing about chlorophyll or photosynthesis, nothing about the theory of evolution, nothing about adaptation, nothing of the sort. I just knew she'd got everything all wrong. And of course the argument against faith, against religion, falls into two essential halves, not necessarily congruent, but I believe congruent. The first is, it's not true. Religion comes from the infancy of our species. I won't say race because I don't think our species is subdivided by races. Infancy of our species when we didn't know that the Earth went round the sun. We didn't know that germs caused disease. We didn't know when we were told in Genesis, you're given dominion over all creatures, that this did not include microorganisms, because we didn't know they were there. So you didn't know they had dominion over us. When diseases broke out, it was blamed on wickedness, or sometimes on the Jews. Or if it was by Jews, on the Amalekites, or as you will. We didn't know anything about the nature of the Earth's crust, how it was cooling, earthquakes, storms, all of this were a mystery. Well, we are at least to that extent a reasoning species. Even a conspiracy theory is often better than no theory at all. The mind searches for form. We're now stuck with the forms that we found in our infancy, in our primitive, barbaric past. Well, that could be fine still. No nation can be without mythology or myth or legend. And there are people who say, well, it's not exactly true. Virgins don't conceive, okay. Bushes don't burn forever, although why that would be so impressive, I've never understood in many cases. Dead men don't walk, and so on and so on. Okay, you're right, it's not really true. It does come from a rather fearful period of the Dark Ages, but at least it's nice to believe it. It teaches good precepts. This, I think, is very radically untrue. I give in my book the example, which I'll give you now, of a person very much influential on my youth, and I know on the Reverend's too, Dr. Martin Luther King. My friend Taylor Branch's book about Dr. King, I would rather call him Doctor than Reverend, because I'm sorry to say I think it's a higher title of honor. Taylor Branch's trilogy about him is called Parting the Waters, The Pillar of Fire, and At Jordan's Edge. And everybody literate here knows the story of Exodus and understands what Dr. King meant when he demanded that his people be free of bondage. But if you think about it for a second, it's a very good thing that the good doctor was only using this metaphorically. If he'd really been invoking the lessons of Genesis and Exodus, he would have been saying that his people had the right to kill anyone who stood in their way, to exterminate all other tribes, to mutilate their children's genitalia, to make slaves of those they captured, to take the land and property of others, to engage in rather long and hideous and elaborate arguments about ox goring, and finally, which is the sentence that ends that, or the verse that ends that section of the book, should not suffer a witch to live, the warrant for witch burning. In other words, in these books, there are the warrants for genocide, for slavery, for the torture of children, for disobedience, for genital mutilation, for annexation, for rape, and all the rest of it. It's a very good thing that this is man-made. There are those who say that they wish they could believe, and I suppose a decent atheist could say that if only for lack of evidence he wishes he or she could. I can't be among their number. I'm very glad it is not true that there is a permanent, unshakable, unchallengeable celestial supervision, a divine North Korea in which no privacy, no liberty is possible from the moment of conception, not just till the moment of death, but until well after. I've been to North Korea, and now I know what a prayerful state would look like. I know what it would be like to praise God from dawn till dusk. I've seen it happen. And it's the most disgusting and depressing and pointless and soulless thing you can picture. But at least with North Korea, you can die and you can leave. Christianity won't let you do that, because I mentioned another thing about the Old Testament. The Old Testament may have, any Jews and Christians who like it may like this too. They may have genocide, rape, racism, all the rest of the things I've mentioned, but it never mentions punishment of the dead. When you're done, when you're in the mass grave into which you've been thrown as an Amalekite, it's over. Not until gentle Jesus, meek and mild, is the concept of hell introduced. Eternal torture, eternal punishment for you and all your family for the smallest transgression. I have no hesitation in saying this is a wicked belief. I've also no hesitation in saying, and I mustn't trespass on the Reverend's time, that we don't need it in two senses. One is it's wicked. Two, we have and always have had a much superior tradition. We know that Democritus and Epicurus worked out in ancient Athens the world was made of atoms, that the gods did not exist and certainly took no interest in human affairs, and would be foolish to do so, and would be wicked if they did. We have the tradition that brings us through Galileo and Spinoza and Thomas Paine and Voltaire and Thomas Jefferson and Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein, men of great wisdom and insight, by all means struck by the awe-inspiring character of our universe, by all means open to devotional music and architecture and poetry, by all means aware of the transcendent, but look through the Hubble telescope if you want to see something that is awe-inspiring. And don't look to blood-stained old myths. Now, why now? Why am I doing this now, people ask? Well, I'll tell you why now, because in the last few years it's become impossible to turn a page of a newspaper without being, as the religious would say, offended In other words, I don't think I sound self-pitying if I say that I'm offended that a cartoonist in a tiny democratic country in Scandinavia, Denmark, can't do his job without a death threat, and that no American magazine or newspaper would reprint those cartoons, either to elucidate the question or in solidarity. I'm offended that civil society in Iraq is being destroyed, leveled by the parties of God. I'm offended that people in this country believe that they have the right to advocate the teaching of garbage to children under the fatuous name of intelligent design. I believe that we're... I thought you'd never clap. Just as I believe that where religion ends, philosophy begins, where alchemy ends, chemistry begins, where astrology ends, astronomy begins, and now the people will say, well, let's give equal time to astrology in the schools. It's nonsense, dangerous and sinister nonsense. The Pope says, AIDS may be bad, but condoms are much worse. What kind of moral teaching is this? And how many people are going to die for such dogma? You see what I mean? So, I'll be very brief. There's an end to this, an end particularly to the cultural cringe that says that if someone can claim to be a religious spokesman, they are entitled to respect. I have to say it in your presence, sir. I think that the title Reverend is something people should be more concerned to live down than to live up to. Thank you.
When we look at history, it's clear that many core Christian claims collapse under basic evidence. The Genesis creation story says the earth was made in 6 days about 6,000 years ago, but geology, radiometric dating, and fossil records prove our planet is over 4.5 billion years old, and that life evolved over hundreds of millions of years. The Bible describes a global flood in Genesis 6 through 9, yet ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica show uninterrupted layers of snow and ice dating back 100,000 years. No sign of a worldwide deluge. Scripture commands horrific acts. In 1 Samuel 15:3, God orders the slaughter of men, women, children, and animals. In Exodus 21:20-21, slavery is condoned outright. These are not moral foundations. They are relics of an ancient, tribal society. Science explains what religion once guessed at. Germ theory replaced the idea that disease is divine punishment. Evolution by natural selection, supported by DNA evidence, explains life's diversity far better than intelligent design. The Hubble telescope shows galaxies billions of light years away. Impossible in a 6,000-year-old universe. And Christian teachings still cause harm today. The Catholic ban on condoms worsened the AIDS crisis. Creationist lobbying undermines education. And religious intolerance fuels violence worldwide. When moral progress happens, abolition of slavery, women's rights, ending segregation, it's been driven by human reason and empathy, not by obeying Bronze Age texts.
I think that you made a very interesting analysis of how people use or misuse God, but you made no argument about God himself. And by attacking the quote wicked unquote use of God does not at all address the existence of God or non-existence of God. We are sitting in a room that, because of lights, we assume that there is electricity in the building. Electricity can light up a room or burn it down. It does not mean electricity does not exist because it burns the building down, or that it is inherently wicked. It is how people use it. So clearly, people have misused God as they've misused other things that are possibly positive. But its existence is not in any way proven or disproven by you giving a long diatribe on those that have mishandled and misused God, because there are many that you can cite that have acted in a way that shows the goodness of God. Your book, God is Not Great, could be refuted by many that feel he is great or she is great, whatever way you relate to God. Science, to me, does not wipe away the existence of God, because science had to start somewhere. So to pick up mankind in its evolving state does not tell me where mankind began, how it became a long story of ordered steps. Well, who ordered them? Why do things follow such a natural progression? Who set the progress? And in fact, even the term wicked, if there is no God and if there is no supreme mechanism that governs the world, what makes right right or what makes wrong wrong? Why don't we just go by whoever's the strongest at any given period in history? Because nothing is wicked. Because whoever's in power at the time would determine what is wicked and what is not wicked, because there's no real moral code, because there's nobody to judge that. So at one hand, we're going to argue God doesn't exist. At the other hand, we're going to call people wicked. Wicked according to who? And according to what? It would be based on whoever has the power at that time. So I think that the real thing that I'm interested in, Mr. Hitchens, is to really discuss the idea of God and the idea of a supreme being, and how creatures and creation have just by some great coincidence, an unexplained scheme, follows some order that just happened by itself. Something, some force, some overruling force had to set all of that pattern in, and it continues thousands of years later. Can you give a million examples of where people have misused that, where they've distorted it, where in the name of God or North Korea or other tragedies have happened? Yes. In terms of the civil rights movement, it was absolutely fueled by a belief in God and a belief in right or wrong. And had not there been this belief that there was a right and a wrong, civil rights movement that you alluded to or that you referred to would not have existed, because what made it wrong for people to be slaves? What made it wrong for humans to be treated unequally? Because there was nobody to say that they were all equal. It was whoever had the strength. But at the end, what is refreshing is that you are a man of faith, because any man that at this date still has faith that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq has more faith than any religious person I know.
Sharpton's electricity analogy fails because we can directly measure electricity. It has observable properties, equations like Ohm's law, and can be demonstrated on demand. God has no such measurable evidence. Simply pointing to order in the universe isn't proof of design. Complex order can emerge naturally from physical laws. Snowflakes form intricate patterns without a designer. Evolution explains life's diversity through cumulative natural selection, not preset ordered steps. The first cause argument ignores that physics shows how matter and energy behave without invoking a supernatural agent. Quantum fluctuations can produce particles from a vacuum, and cosmology explains the universe's development from the Big Bang onward. As for morality, history shows moral codes predate Christianity. The Code of Hammurabi, 1750 BCE, set laws long before the Bible. Morality is rooted in empathy, cooperation, and the social contracts that allow humans to thrive, not divine decree. If morality required God, then God's own commands in Scripture, like ordering genocide in 1 Samuel 15:3, would be good, yet by today's standards they're horrific. The civil rights movement wasn't exclusively powered by religion. Leaders like Bayard Rustin drew on secular human rights ideals, and morality is equally championed in secular societies today. A belief system isn't validated by the good some people do in its name, just as belief in Zeus or Odin wasn't proven by acts of kindness in their followers.
The belief that there were weapons of mass destruction, or rather the conviction that Saddam Hussein was interested in weapons of mass destruction, you could, I suppose, describe as an argument from design. In other words, he'd had them before, he'd known how to conceal them, he'd used them several times, he seems to be prepared to risk his entire political career on the idea of reacquiring them. I would say that was not a belief that had no evidence, and I would say that anyone who treated him as if he was innocent on the subject would be a sap, actually, would be my short word for it. Second, on the civil rights movement, I expected you to be more assertive. I don't know what Dr. King's private convictions about religion were. I know that he studied Hegel, I know that he studied Marx, I know that among his very close entourage were a large number of secular socialists and communists. You know their names too. Stanley Levinson is probably the best known, but among the black civil rights leadership, Bayard Rustin, secular socialist, Philip Randolph, secular socialist trade union leader. These were the building blocks for the March on Washington, as was Victor Reuther and many others. The belief that it is illegal as well as evil to keep black Americans in subjection does not require any supernatural endorsement. It had been proved repeatedly in law and in morality and in ethics, and demonstrated in practice. The only thing that had always been consistently justified by the churches was initially slavery, the right to hold someone as a slave, biblically warranted, and the right to keep the races separate, which is endorsed by a church that, just to give a contemporary example, one of the current candidates for the Republican nomination is a member of a church, the so-called Mormon Church of Latter-day Saints, that until 1965 had it as an article of faith that the Bible separates the sons of Ham and makes them lesser. Well, I don't have to discredit a text like that because I don't think it has any authority. So in a sense, I return the question to you. Now, I didn't say that God was misused. I hope I wasn't so poorly understood by everybody. I said that the idea of God is a dictatorial one to begin with, the belief in a supreme, eternal, invigilating creator who knows what you think and what you do and cares about it and will reward or punish you and watches you while you sleep is, I think, a horrific belief. A man-made one, fortunately. I'm very glad there's no evidence for it. In case I was misunderstood, let me assert again, I think it's innately an awful belief. However, the cleverest theologian, and have been some, has never been able to demonstrate that such a person exists. It's impossible to do so. It's not possible either for me to demonstrate conclusively that no such person exists. That cannot be done either. But one thing can be done. A person who claims not to know only that this person exists, a task beyond our brain, but to claim to know his or her, I accept your correction, Reverend, mind, to say, I know, because I'm in holy orders, what this entity wants you to do, what he wants you to eat, who he wants you to go to bed with, and how he wants you to go to bed with them, what you may read, in what associations in private you may form, what thoughts you may have. That person is out of the argument now, it seems to me. We know that no one knows that. So the claim made by the religious that they know God, they know his mind, and they can tell us what to do in his name is, I think, exploded. Further, it is not argued by my side, at any rate, or by no one I know on it, that our presence here on the planet is something that is susceptible of a smooth, logical, reasonable explanation. To the contrary, we are still very much in doubt as to precisely how we came to be human and to separate ourselves from some of our common ancestors. And, we also know that of the species that have been on this small planet, in this tiny solar system, since the beginning of measurable time, of the number that were ever in existence, more than 98.9% have become extinct. A certain solipsism, I think, is required to believe that we, as a resulting species, are somehow the center of the created cosmos. This is not modesty, as the Christians call it. It's not humility. It's an unbelievably arrogant claim to make. But at least it makes up for the other claim we're supposed to put up with, which is, well, yes, but we're also miserable sinners conceived in filth and doomed to abject ourselves. Both of these positions are too extreme, too strenuous, too fanatical, and both of them reinforce each other in unpleasant ways, and both should be outgrown by us.
Hitchens dismantles the idea that morality or justice requires divine authority. The civil rights movement wasn't purely a religious project. Key figures like Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph were secular humanists. The legal and ethical basis for ending segregation and slavery came from constitutional law, Enlightenment philosophy, and universal human rights, not the Bible. In fact, churches were some of the strongest defenders of slavery, citing verses like Ephesians 6:5 and 1 Peter 2:18 to justify it, and many Christian denominations opposed racial integration well into the 20th century. He's right that the concept of an all-seeing, all-judging God is not just unsupported by evidence, it's dictatorial by design. No one can prove God exists, but religion claims to know his mind, his rules, and how everyone should live. That's not humility, that's authority without evidence. Science openly admits it doesn't yet have every answer about human origins, but it has uncovered far more than religion ever did. From fossil records tracing human evolution to the staggering fact that over 98% of all species have gone extinct, showing we're not the center of creation. To believe otherwise is not modest faith, but human arrogance wrapped in theology. If we can build moral systems, laws, and compassion without appealing to invisible authority, why keep clinging to a worldview that's historically fueled slavery, segregation, and censorship? What do you think? Is morality stronger when it's grounded in reason and evidence rather than divine command? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more debates and deep dives.
I just want to say I was completely with you until the end when you got silly on us. And the reason I say that is because you speak about God in the same way that you would speak about a human dictator as though they were equivalent.
Much worse.
Much worse. But it's only worse. It's only worse because of the eternity of it, right? But the characteristics are the same.
No, the absolutism of it.
The absolutism.
The lack
characteristics
of
are the same.
the lack of any appeal.
But that's not. But that's
and
not.
the worship of him by.
My first question, we decided to forego long opening statements. We're going to make this as conversational and respectful and fast-moving as possible. And my first question is going to go to Rabbi Wolpe. David, do you expect to go to heaven?
Not tomorrow. That's the old joke about, the good news is that there's baseball in heaven. The bad news is you're pitching Thursday. So what I would say is that part of the problem of the idea of an afterlife is that we tend to make it far more literal than it needs to be, and as a result, it starts to seem ridiculous. I mean, before you entered this world, could you have imagined mountains and tuna fish and teeth and ideas and music? Of course not. It is literally unimaginable. But we make of the idea of another world something that we can imagine and understand, and so we reduce it to nonsense. It's Mark Twain in Letters from Earth. He said that people assume when they go to heaven they're going to lie on green fields and listen to harp music. He says you wouldn't want to do it for 5 minutes while you're alive, but you think you'll be happy for the rest of eternity doing it after you die. And the crux of it is, and I suspect really what this evening will come down to, is do you believe that human beings are entirely material? Are you only made of stuff? Or is there something non-physical? Is there something ethereal and eternal about you, about us, some mystery at the heart of this stuff? And if there is, then there's a possibility, that we'll all, I don't want to say go somewhere because that assumes that it's spatial. And again, that's the way people think, and the way we think is not necessarily the way the world is. Our minds are much too limited to grasp it. But I'll just close by saying that I always assumed that human beings were more than stuff. And for me, at least, this came home on an emotional level when a little less than 2 years ago, my father died. And as many of you know, it is a Jewish custom when someone's buried to throw dirt on the grave. And I thought this was going to be extraordinarily difficult, to take a shovel full of dirt and throw it on the coffin of somebody that I loved very dearly. But I actually didn't find it nearly as difficult as I anticipated, and the reason is that I knew that whatever was in that coffin, he wasn't there. But I also knew that that wasn't the same thing as he wasn't. It just meant he wasn't there, but he was, and he is. I just don't know how.
Sam, in The End of Faith, you chide scientists who believe that consciousness ends with death. So picking up a little bit on what David said, you wrote, the place of consciousness in the natural world is very much open to question. The truth is we simply do not know what happens after death. To my mind, this very much leaves the door open for a belief in the afterlife.
Although it doesn't make the traditional beliefs in the afterlife any more plausible. It's not the point I was making there. But it does, that point of
of not knowing what happens after death is what worries me about this conversation. I've been very worried about this, that all of you have given up a perfectly serviceable Tuesday evening only to hear the four of us tell you every which way that we have no idea what happens after death. Well, I expressed the fear to my wife, and she was actually able to put me at ease. I'm worried, obviously, about boring all of you, and she said, "Nothing Hitchens does is ever boring." So I have that going for me. Right. I think we should think about what this concept of the afterlife does. We'll talk about the plausible versions of it and how implausible some of the traditional ones are. But I think, just to give some context, we're living in a world in which 9 million children every year die before they reach the age of 5. Okay, year after year after year. I mean, that is an Asian-style tsunami of the sort you remember from 2004 every 10 days, killing only children before the age of 5. I mean, think about these children. Think about their parents. Know that virtually all of these parents are people who believe in God and were praying all the while that their children would be saved. And their prayers were not answered. Now, the afterlife comes into the midst of this reality and as a promise that all of this is going to make sense in the end, that somehow at the end of existence, we're going to be all let in on the punchline and have a mighty laugh with Almighty God for eternity. Now, there's no evidence of that, and I think, therefore, this concept of the afterlife really functions as a substitute for wisdom. It functions as a substitute for really absorbing our predicament, which is that everyone is going to die. There are circumstances that are just catastrophically unfair. Evil sometimes wins, and injustice sometimes wins. And the only justice we're going to find in the world is the justice we make. And I think we have an ethical responsibility to absorb this really down to the soles of our feet. And this notion of an afterlife, the happy talk about how it's all going to work out and it's all part of God's plan, is a way of shirking that responsibility. So that's...
The idea of an afterlife might feel comforting, but comfort isn't evidence. Every credible study in neuroscience shows that consciousness depends on the brain. When blood flow stops, brain activity ceases, and awareness is gone. Even mild oxygen deprivation can erase memories or change personality. Clear proof that the self is rooted in physical processes, not an immortal soul. If the soul existed independently, severe brain injury wouldn't alter who we are, yet it does every time. Historically, every civilization invented its own afterlife. Ancient Egyptians had the Field of Reeds, Vikings had Valhalla, Hindus believe in reincarnation. The Bible's vision of heaven and hell is no more consistent or verifiable than these myths. In fact, early Judaism had no concept of eternal heaven or hell. Sheol was simply a shadowy place for all the dead. Eternal punishment shows up later, influenced by Persian Zoroastrianism. That means Christian afterlife doctrine is borrowed, not revealed. The Bible itself undermines the fairness of the Christian afterlife. In Matthew 25:46, eternal torment is given for disbelief, not moral failure. Revelation 21:8 lists sins alongside unbelief as grounds for the lake of fire. This isn't justice, it's divine favoritism. Even worse, the suffering of children that Sam Harris describes is excused with God's plan, as if the promise of heaven justifies their pain. The truth is, there's no evidence of divine justice waiting for us. Waiting for a cosmic fix is a moral hazard. It can delay action against suffering in the here and now. The only justice humanity has ever achieved, ending slavery, advancing human rights, fighting disease, came from human hands, not divine intervention. If we accept that this life is all we know we have, the responsibility to make it fair and meaningful becomes urgent and real.
Brad, 3 times a day as a religious Jew, you would pray the Amidah, where you extol the God who resurrects the dead. It says that right in one of the most standard of Jewish prayers. When you say that, what are you saying? What do you believe you're saying?
So I need to take a couple steps back and make this a running jump rather than a standing jump.
Sure.
As I understand it, rather than simply reducing someone's idea to a caricature, which is easy to do on all sides in this kind of a conversation, we live in an age in which there are different plausible ways of making sense and connecting the dots. One of them is a kind of reductionism in which everything can be explained by its smallest physical components. And once you've explained how inert matter operates, then you create more complex systems, but you've done all your explaining really at the very basic subatomic levels. And that's completely plausible, and you can tell the entire story that way in a reasonable way. I don't think it's the only way one can do it. One can also say that there are intimations all the way down of what others have called, and I think of as mindfulness. And that the mindfulness all the way down emerges at some point into consciousness, which emerges at some point beyond that into something even beyond the consciousness we're aware of. And we have abilities to access it, not necessarily by what we know. And here I have to say, having read the books of the authors here, I agreed with almost everything that everyone wrote. People claim knowledge where they can't possibly know. But what I think we can also claim is intuitions that go beyond what we know. Things like hope and trust and loyalty. We ground our lives in them. So there are people who use the afterlife as a way of evading their responsibility. But I know that I and Rabbi Wolpe have sat at the bedside of people who were able to connect with others because this belief inspired them to live each moment with dignity and connection. So for me, the prayer is literally false. Having lived one life with flat feet and fat thighs, I fervently hope that God does not physically resurrect the dead. Although I will tell you, I'm one of the rabbis dancing in Gadi Levi's dance thing, so I expect to have buns of steel by the time you come back for that. But I think it's a metaphor for saying that there is a oneness of which we are an expression, and that does not cease with our death, and that in some very important way, although not one that is reducible to knowledge, I don't claim to know, but I trust that we continue beyond the grave.
Thanks. Christopher, what's wrong with that? If a belief in the afterlife helps one, as Brad said, deal with the inevitability of death, maybe this is a good thing.
Well, then anything that made you feel better would be okay, which I'm sorry to say I think is a contemptible viewpoint. Here's the problem with the afterlife fantasy. It's the same as religion in general. If you can't hear, I hope it's not my fault.
Let me just move the mic.
All right, how's that? Okay. Well, not to duck the opening question, give myself a chance to repeat my answer. That would mean that anything that made you feel good or better was fine, which I think is a contemptible position, I'm sorry to say. And it would be as good as drugs, for example. And I don't believe, and in fact Marx never said, that religion is just an opiate. But religion and the afterlife fantasy have these things in common. First, they're man-made. That's very important. They represent claims by humans to be able to interpret the divine and to give themselves power by doing so. We all admit we don't know. That's because we can't know. So the people who have to leave the island right away are those who say they do, who for centuries have tyrannized and still do millions of human beings by claiming to hold the keys of heaven and hell. Leading to my second point, religion is totalitarian in its practice and its theory. It claims to know things it can't know, and it claims to have powers it cannot have. It says if you make the right propitiations and the right donations, you may get paradise, and if you don't, you may get an eternity of pain. That includes, by the way, the souls of unbaptized children of the millions who Sam mentioned. Then there's, I'm afraid to say, but you also, as you'd expect from the man, made the argument of fraud. St. Peter's in Rome was built on the sale of indulgences. That's to say, in return for cash, the promise of a remission of sin and of time in hell or purgatory. There are chantries, actually quite beautiful ones, still all over Europe, still working, prayers being said for the repose and remission of souls. Pope Benedict, the most reactionary prelate for considerable time to lead the church, is trying to restore the idea of remission of sin in exchange for donations or other in-kind operations. This is, I'm sorry if it sounds unduly functionalist, but until we've dealt with these questions, we can't have a serious discussion. Now, there's also, I think, a real problem about anything that's eternal. I should probably close with this. It will happen to all of us that at some point you get tapped on the shoulder and told, not just that the party's over, but slightly worse, the party's going on, but you have to leave. and it's going on without you. That's the reflection, I think, that most upsets people about their demise. All right then, because it might make us feel better, let's pretend the opposite. Instead, you'll get tapped on the shoulder and told, great news, this party's going on forever, and you can't leave. You've got to stay. The boss says so, and he also insists that you have a good time. I've read about David's father, and I had a bad time when my own father passed on, but the father proposed by monotheism is the father who doesn't die, who reassures his children, don't worry, I'll never leave you. You'll never see the end of me. You'll never get the chance to feel sorry. I'm always there. I'm the absolute ultimate in dictatorship, and in my courts there's no appeal. Do you really think that this would cheer up anyone of sentience or humanity or capable of feeling of irony? I submit it's out of the question.
Belief in an afterlife might offer comfort, but comfort is not proof. Everything we know from neuroscience shows that consciousness depends entirely on the brain. When blood flow or neural activity stops, awareness ends. Brain injuries, Alzheimer's, strokes, and anesthesia can erase memory, alter personality, and shut down the sense of self. If a soul existed independently, these changes wouldn't be so precise or predictable. Historically, the Christian afterlife is not an unbroken revelation. It evolved. Ancient Israelites believed in Sheol, a shadowy place where all the dead went, Psalm 6:5, Ecclesiastes 9:5. Concepts of heaven and hell emerged later, influenced by Persian Zoroastrianism and Greek philosophy. Even the New Testament contradicts itself. Some verses describe sleep until resurrection, 1 Thessalonians 4:13-16. Others promise immediate paradise, Luke 23:43. And the meaning often depends on translation or punctuation. Biblical justice also raises moral problems. Matthew 25:46 and Revelation 21:8 promise eternal punishment for disbelief, not just immoral acts. The doctrine of hell has been used for power, most famously in the Middle Ages, when the Catholic Church sold indulgences to shorten time in purgatory, funding projects like St. Peter's Basilica. That's a human system built on fear, not divine truth. Near-death experiences don't rescue the claim. Their features, bright lights, tunnels, life reviews, can be triggered by oxygen loss, drugs, or brain stimulation. Crucially, they reflect local culture. Christians meet Jesus, Hindus meet Yama, Buddhists see entirely different visions. If one afterlife were real, these accounts wouldn't vary so widely.
I just want to say I was completely with you until the end when you got silly on us. And the reason I say that is because you speak about God in the same way that you would speak about a human dictator as though they were equivalent.
No,
Now,
no, this,
either,
no, no,
now
no,
either,
no,
either
much,
this
no,
is,
much, much,
either
much
this is
worse.
Much worse. But it's only worse. It's only worse because of the eternity of it, right? But the characteristics are the same.
No, the absolutism of it.
The absolutism,
The
and
lack
the characteristics
of
are the
any,
same. But
the
that's,
lack of any appeal.
But that's not. But that's
and
not.
the worship of him by his slaves.
Except that that's not at all what any tradition envisions, and even if it did envision it, as you and I think would both agree, the envisioning of traditions of what a God could be are very limited and partial. And so if you want to make it, yes, that it's North Korea forever, then I would say you're belittling the notion of what it means to have a God. You're belittling the notion of what it means to have eternity in, if not bliss, at least reasonable happiness. And it's true that you lose everything in this world, but also it's not at all the case, and you know that it's not the case, that the notion of the afterlife invariably leads to neglect of what is important in this world. Sometimes, in fact, it does the exact opposite. You can take large swaths of belief. You mentioned Marx. Communism, for example, which repudiated the idea of the afterlife and therefore thought you have to create utopia here, and it led it to horrendous misdeeds throughout the 20th century. So the belief in the afterlife can be totalitarian and terrible, but so can the idea that there's nothing after this world and therefore you have to perfect human beings here. It can work both ways.
I wanted to ask you, Christopher, do you really believe that dead is dead? You don't believe in any kind of consciousness going after death? You believe dead is dead?
Okay. The survival of consciousness independent of the brain, which Sam knows more about than I, and we're getting better acquainted with, is quite different from the religious belief in a mandated path by which you can follow or not follow, leading to reward and punishment. Completely different. It's different in the same way as, say, spiritualism was, which wasn't really a religion, but was a very strong, fraudulent movement that not coincidentally flourished after the First World War in the hope of putting people in touch with dead relatives and so forth. Not one single interesting thing ever got said from the other side. Fascinating, you know. Burblings from the beyond, but millions of people pitifully paid attention to it. I guess my answer has to depend on David's point about stuff. We actually know a great deal more than we ever did, than any of our predecessors did, about what stuff we're made of. We know that our DNA gives us enormous amounts in common with other animals, huge amounts. We know that stars had to die. Larry Krauss makes this point very well in his lectures on physics. Stars had to die. One every second blew up, and is still blowing up since the Big Bang. We're made, if you want to call it pretty, from stardust or nuclear waste, depending on your on your analysis. But there's absolutely no reason to think that those molecules would be worth reassembling. That they will rejoin, as do the animals. And as have done the other the species we didn't know about till recently, the other human tribes, the Cro-Magnons, the Neanderthals, the ones that aren't even mentioned in any holy book, they only died out about 20,000 years ago. Who has heaven and hell for them? It's as likely for us as it is, I think, for any other dog, whale, or bacteria.
Well,
and no more than that.
Sam, what does it mean when you write that you think that consciousness may indeed survive?
Well, there are many odd ways in which consciousness could survive, and you can make a philosophically respectable argument that consciousness could survive the death of the brain. It's by no means the majority opinion in neuroscience or philosophy that it would. For instance, there's a philosopher at Oxford, Nick Bostrom. This is one of the weirder arguments, but still more plausible than the arguments you get from religion. Nick, there's actually very little you have to assume to make this seem somewhat robust. The argument is called the simulation argument, and he argues that we are all very likely not living in a real universe, but living in a simulated universe. And we are being simulated on the hard drives of computers of the future. Now he gets there with a few simple steps. You simply have to acknowledge that consciousness is, at bottom, the result of information processing at the level of the brain And there's nothing magical about brains. It could be information processing in a computer of the future. Most scientists think that's true. They don't think there's anything magical about the wet stuff in our heads, and that consciousness is at some point going to be instantiated in computers. Then you simply have to grant that humans of the future will run simulations of the past in the way that we run simulations, Sims games, and then there's just one short move that simulated universes, almost by definition, will outnumber real universes, and therefore we are a lot more likely to be among the simulated ancestors than the real ancestors. Now, again, this everyone acknowledges it seems a little crazy, but the assumptions that you have to take on board are not so weak. And I would add to this the somewhat disconcerting idea that if in fact we are running as a simulation on a computer of the future, this computer could have been built by Mormons or Scientologists who would want to simulate the truth of their religion. And therefore, all religions could be true in this simulated universe. And we could expect to see Jesus coming back on clouds of glory and moving to Missouri as the Mormons expect. So now all of that sounds completely crazy, but it is not as crazy as the version of the afterlife that is really on offer traditionally, which has been actually neatly sidestepped here because it entails the resurrection of the dead. Most people think that the afterlife religion is offering, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, has something to do with the soul floating off the brain into a tunnel of light and into paradise. But that's actually not the canonical afterlife. The canonical afterlife is God has to do the humble work of reassembling us. And I don't want to take more than my allotted time here, but I think we should talk about just how implausible that vision is, because that actually is the vision of Judaism and Christianity and Islam.
I just want to make one quick addendum. There's also, who I thought you were going to talk about, is Galen Strawson. I mean, another Oxford philosopher who says that consciousness is actually so impossible philosophically to figure out that it must be that it exists even in inanimate matter, even though it doesn't seem that way. So I don't think that but let's leave aside how difficult consciousness is to figure out without some sort of either strange hypothesis or spirit. Yes, it's true that much of Judaism talks about resurrection, much of it talks about afterlife, but there's a plurality of voices. And I mean, the Talmud says, for example, you assume that the sages are in paradise, but it is not so. In fact, paradise is in the sages. That's not the sort of voice that generally you hear when the literalist view of an afterlife is attacked. And for more on that, I turn to my colleague, Rabbi Brad Artson.
I would actually love for us all to go out to coffee and leave them aside so that we could say things like, wow, that's really interesting, I haven't thought about that. And what do you do with this? Rather than the scoring of points. And so there's a lot of cleverness and there are a lot of quips. But at the end of it, what it sounds like we're saying is that religion is a monolith, and the worst of religion is compared to the best of science, which is fluid and evolving. And I'm halfway there with you. I think one of the greatnesses of science is its capacity to be self-reflective and its capacity to change convictions. But the wreckage of scientific error is fairly impressive, and the diversity of religious thought is also, I think, undergirded, unfortunately, I think in part because we all had bad religious education as kids and we're still in recovery. So,
but Bradley, I want to accept your challenge, but what do you, I mean, is Maimonides the worst of religion? Maimonides came right out and said you have to believe in the resurrection as a literal
yes, and
truth.
Maimonides also said that what I've written in my book is disguised so that people will, if they need literalism, latch onto it and miss what I'm trying to say. And he also said that we call the world to come because we don't experience it during this lifetime, but eternity exists at the present. And if you attain a right consciousness, you can be in eternity now. So the challenge is, We all come to it with our own different concrete needs. But religion is, I think, far more nuanced. And I guess the plea I would like to offer to you, because the parts of your books, both of you gentlemen, that I agreed with was everything you trashed religion for, it deserves to be trashed for. I have an autistic son, and if I believed in that bully in the sky, I would have to tell Dr. Wexler that I was leaving my employment. But I don't, and I don't think that my tradition or the Buddhist tradition or the richness of Hindu tradition understood in a nuanced and ethical way is any more problematic than science's capacity to learn from its mistakes and to move on. And the way the Bible is used in my community with my students is, I would hold up as ethical as anywhere else, and a part of that is the recognition that although we do not know, we hold to hopes that orient us and allow us to value each other as of abiding significance.
What this closing exchange really exposes is how flexible religious claims become when tested. The rabbis here admit they don't take resurrection literally, yet it's in core Jewish and Christian doctrine. The Nicene Creed explicitly affirms the resurrection of the dead. Maimonides, one of Judaism's most revered scholars, wrote that belief in bodily resurrection is required, even if privately he reinterpreted it. This shows a pattern. When literal claims are challenged by reason or science, they're rebranded as metaphor. Science gives us no reason to expect reassembly after death. Our DNA and brain structure don't store you in a way that can survive destruction. The idea that God would gather your atoms ignores the fact that atoms are constantly recycled into other organisms. Your resurrection would mean undoing billions of years of natural processes, for which there's zero evidence. And history tells us that beliefs about the afterlife have never been consistent, even within Christianity. Early Christians disagreed over whether the soul sleeps until judgment or goes immediately to heaven. The doctrine of eternal hell, used for centuries to control behavior, wasn't uniformly taught until long after Jesus' death. Religious nuance doesn't erase the harm of the literal version. Billions have been told that salvation hinges on belief, with eternal punishment for doubt. Mark 16:16, Revelation 21:8. The fact that some believers now reject the bully in the sky is progress. But that progress came from human moral reasoning, not revelation. Science's self-correction is a strength. Religion's shifting definitions are often an attempt to preserve authority when old claims become indefensible. If eternity exists now, as some claim, it's still not evidence for life after death. It's just a philosophical reframe. The honest position remains. We do not know, and there's no credible proof that consciousness survives death. Which means the value we give each other in this life is the only kind of immortality we can verify. So here's the question. If meaning, love, and justice are all built here and now, why stake our lives on an unproven promise? If you found this breakdown thought-provoking, drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more deep dives into debates that challenge what we think we know.